Hey, welcome back to Project Sunny. We're back with more progress on the rear body. Follow along on this project with the links in the description. In our last update, I tacked together the two sections of floor panel to make one proper length floor. My plan was to finish welding the full length of the seam and move on. But the more I looked at it, the less I was satisfied with the work. For one thing, the profile of the ridges on the two floor panels didn't exactly match up perfectly. That's just what happens sometimes when you Frankenstein a couple of aftermarket parts together to make the one you really need. But I wanted to correct those profiles before I moved on and make them at least better, if not perfect. To fix this, I cut the original welds apart and made some adjustments with a hammer and body chisel, realigning the contours of the two panels to match better. That worked out pretty well, but when I went to weld the panels back together, I made a bit of a mess with the new joints. I made two rookie mistakes when it comes to sheet metal welding. First, I didn't have sufficient backing behind my work to absorb the heat. Second, I adjusted my voltage down because I was blowing through it. But because of that, the new joints were too cold to get good penetration. I got caught in a loop trying to correct it, just making things worse the longer I worked on it. So after some soul searching and a little advice, I cleaned up the garbage welds and went back to make things right. In some places, I'd worked the metal so much that I had to weld in sheet metal plugs just to bridge the two panels back together. These helped a lot. More importantly, I made sure I had a copper backer behind every new weld to absorb the heat. And I dialed the juice back up on the welder to get good penetration again. One of the guys in the office said he could tell just by the sound of it that it was working out much better. So I finally got the floor panel in decent shape both visually and structurally. I went ahead and sprayed it with epoxy primer for now using our 2K Aerospray to keep the welds clean until I could install the floor panel into the vehicle later in the project. In the meantime, I had two other details to wrap up back here. I had a local fab shop bend up a piece of 14 gauge sheet metal to recreate the lower weather stripping threshold that had totally rotted away. At nearly 4 feet long but only 3 inches wide, this required something more serious than the bench brake we have here in the shop. I trimmed this up and notched it in place in the tailgate opening after prepping the bare metal with weld-through primer to prevent corrosion between these surfaces. I used our special MIG spot welding tip to join the new lip to the rear body cross member. Finally, I remembered the original floor panel had some mounting tabs welded to the underside. Two of these hold a wiring harness in place and the other mounts an electrical connector. Now the aftermarket floor panel didn't include these and the originals were too rusty to save, but they were still intact enough to make good patterns from. So I took some measurements and marked the 3 new tabs out on a leftover section of the donor floor panel. After cutting out the rough blanks with a cutting wheel, I trimmed the tabs to their final shape using Eastwood's new 5-inch Throatless Shear. A standard bench vise and a body hammer were adequate for making the simple bends after deburring them on the belt sander. I still have the original floor panel to use for reference when I go to weld these tabs to the new floor later. So we're truly done with the rear floor until it's time to install it. Now that the rear body is fully intact, our next step is to get the body shell on a rotisserie so we can work on the rest of it, as well as start working on the chassis. Check back with us next time to see how that goes. If you're already an Eastwood subscriber, you'll be notified when that episode comes out. And if you're not, well, how come? Go ahead and give this video a like and hit subscribe while you're at it. And to check out any of the tools or finishes we used in this installment, head on over to eastwood.com today.